dangerous neocons and other right-wing deep state operatives are still thriving under the Trump administration. And the propaganda seems to dwell on the left-wing deep state operatives, even though there's only one deep state that is catering to these different audiences. Now, a couple of days ago, on September 11th, we saw, for example, on the Alex Jones show, a shorter segment on the 9/11 attacks, and some old stuff was repeated about this event. And you could tell that Alex Jones did not want to really get into some of these individuals and some of these Republican circles, because the midterm elections are coming. They're very close, and it looks like the Republicans are going to lose the House, right? So, for example, one of Donald Trump's most important supporters is Rudolph Giuliani, former mayor of New York. And, of course, Giuliani was in the crosshairs of various accusations over the years concerning 9/11. And then we have one of Trump's oldest friends, Stephen Schwarzman, from the Blackstone group, which coincidentally had once bought the debt for World Trade Center Building 7, which housed the Security and Exchange Commission and various other spooky agencies. And of course, Building 7 collapsed in a few seconds, even though it was not hit by an airplane. Now, Schwarzman, the old friend of Trump, is a member of Skull&Bones, and there's also links to the CFR and Henry Kissinger, who was supposed to lead the 9/11 Commission at first. But then people thought it was too ridiculous to pick him. Now, then we have the Homeland Security personnel that Trump picked or Trump kept in his administration, and some of these people are, of course, or seem, of course, very dangerous. They've been involved in 9/11 in these events, and they've also restructured the FEMA response to up-and-coming terror events. There's going to be a nationwide, I think there's a nationwide alert, presidential alert to people's phones, a trial run. I have to ask ourselves what's going to happen when there's another 9/11, and this might play into the hands of the Republicans. What is alternative media going to do? So, there's the 9/11 is still not hasn't been adequately investigated, and there's some, of course, interesting lines of inquiry going into the Republican Party, and there's little interest in so-called conspiracy media to investigate those leads. In the presidential campaign, Trump did attack Saudi Arabia with words and their links to 9/11. As a president, he flip-flopped on the issue and then facilitated the purchase of a lot of weapons. And now Qatar seems to be painted as the bad guy, isolated within the region. And we saw, for example, in the John Podesta emails that Saudi Arabia is still financing terrorism. Qatar involved in certain revolutions in North Africa, of course, exacerbating the migrant crisis in Europe. Then, of course, we have this whole Kavanaugh thing, Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court. The man is a trusted fellow traveler of the Bush clan, likely member of Skull&Bones. So he's also been involved in some alleged cover-ups or some alleged mollycoddling years ago when the Clintons were under fire for people dying around them. And so this is not somebody you want in the Supreme Court, whether you're a conservative or not. You do not want these kind of people in the Supreme Court. Why didn't they just pick somebody acceptable? You know, why didn't they find someone who was halfway decent. So Kavanaugh made his degree, got his degree from Yale University, made his doctor at the Yale Law School. Very close to George W. Bush, which is the Skull&Bones family, has been for generations. Kavanaugh also served as staff secretary in the executive office of President Bush at the time when the votes were recounted in Florida in the year 2000, and we all know how weird that was. So, to smooth that one over, the Bush campaign not only got Kavanaugh, but also James Baker and Roger Stone, who's now being investigated, interestingly enough. So then you had H.R. McMaster, he became National Security Advisor. Then you saw John Bolton follow this up. Bolton was at college, Yale also as well, was at Yale when the two Clintons were at Yale. And we don't know if Bolton is as a member of Skull&Bones or any other secret societies at that university, but that's a likely possibility. Later, Bolton worked for George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, member of Council of Foreign Relations think tanks such as the Project for a New American Century, which of course kind of sort of predicted 9/11, a new Pearl Harbor event to facilitate the transformation of the U.S. military. And this is the very same, and this Bolton guy, Project for a New American Century, he's now in the administration of Donald Trump, and that's not of any interest whatsoever, apparently, to many in the alternative media who just want to advertise for the Republicans right now, even though there's only one deep state and it's catering to different audiences. So then, of course, the next 9/11 looming could be nuclear, could be biological, could be anything, and it could be 10 times as big as September 11th. But who is warning about another false flag or an upcoming false flag? Who's warning? Is it Infowars? Is it Alex Jones? No. Unfortunately, it's Noam Chomsky and The Intercept from Glenn Greenwald. So it's kind of this left-wing media. They've speculated about a new massive suspicious terror attack, which is going to solve Trump's problems. It's going to make Trump popular. It's going to distract from Russiagate. It's going to distract from all of these things. The Republicans, if this new terror attack happens before the midterm elections, Republicans would gain a huge boost, would keep the House, and would rule not just the Parliament, but also the White House and the Supreme Court, which is creepy, but again, there's only one deep state, so it's not that important which party is currently in power. So, this could be there could be a new 9/11, and then of course this Iran thing for years. Alternative media warned about an Iran war, the wishes of the neocons. Now, places like Infowars, who used to be conspiracy media, they are sort of kind of given their okay somewhat to an Iran war, as long as Donald Trump is benefiting from that. So we'll see how that one develops. And then of course you have the old baggage, Afghanistan, right? Do we see a realistic plan to wrap up Afghanistan, to clear the situation? No. Donald Trump knows nothing about Afghanistan, and he has a new strategy picked, suggested to him by his generals and Eric Prince from former Blackwater contractor company, and of course Prince's family has been involved in the CNP, Council for National Policy, just like other people from the so-called New Right or Alt-Right. Again, there's only one deep state running all these political groups. The so-called Great Game is still on about Afghanistan, so that's Russia and the Anglo-American Empire fighting over control of that region. Now, Russia, of course, can sell cheap weapons to the Taliban or whatever group is active or whatever warlord is active. And the Americans, of course, then have more pretext to enlarge their operations and to keep this conflict, this ever-growing conflict, going. So, Trump, when he campaigned, he made it very clear he wants the world to fear the United States. He wants to quit the wishy-washy, namby-pamby way of doing things. He wants everybody to tremble in fear. So if you can find it, look again at Trump's foreign policy speech during his campaign. Very few people took notice of that. We analyzed it and we basically predicted what came later. So, of course, many people are getting angry, such as Ron Paul. Ron Paul was having a fit on Twitter, and Paul traditionally is very, very soft on Russia, but luckily he does criticize the American neocons that are still active and in power. So, if there's going to be a new terror attack, of course, we'll be covering this thing from the first moment, and we'll be doing that in a very professional manner. And we will look in all kinds of directions, and we'll also be watching what other alternative media is going to be doing about this attack, if they're just going to put up their flag whichever way the wind is blowing, whether they're going to go along with it, or whether they're not going along with it. We'll also be monitoring Russian propaganda, which seems to be the main source nowadays, or had been for the last couple of years, the main source for alternative media, unfortunately. We'll be looking at that as well. Now, after the September 11th, 2001, we've seen some sort of convergence between the Anglo-American superpower and the Russian superpower. They were both entangled in a war against Islamic terrorism. Russia's war was a bit more low-key, but still significant in Chechnya and other places, also internally on Russian territory. And Russia even had its own bin Laden-type enemy, Shamil Basayev and a few others. They wore kind of the same jackets that bin Laden wore, and they made the same kind of propaganda videos with the short AK rifle in the background leaning against a tree or whatever. And so both countries were close. The Russians even gave indirect support to NATO, and there was a common Russia-NATO group that was dealing with certain threats. So that might also be a direction this could be going. Who knows? Maybe the superpowers will play nicely with each other again. We'll see about that. But we can all pretty much conclude that the neocons and these dangerous circles are still active. They're still in power. A new 9/11 might happen, and maybe even as early as the time span between now and the midterm elections.